Hello everyone, and welcome to another iClone 7 Academy tutorial. Today's topic will be lighting a 3D scene. Well, we'll show you step by step how this Roman Patio was lit, both daytime and the nighttime. However, I have to warn you, this is an intermediate to advanced tutorial, so if you haven't watched the GI Basics or the Voxel tutorial, I would definitely recommend you watch those first before you jump into this one. Otherwise, you might get lost when we start covering the global illumination part of the scene, because here we'll cover not just direct lighting, but also global illumination, GI enhancement tools, as well as IBL, ambient occlusion, and LUTs, which are lookup tables, which are basically filters to enhance your images. So let's get started because we have a ton of stuff to cover, shall we? So, before we get started with the lighting, I just want to cover very briefly the new horizon-based ambient occlusion. This is your visualizer. If you click on this checkbox over here, you can see how much ambient occlusion gets put onto the geometry. The blend, actually, it just shows you can control how much you put on top of the geometry. The strength, obviously, is how dark the ambient occlusion gets at the intersection of the geometries. Spread or range is basically the spread of that goes from the intersection outwards. Again, this is an artistic choice on how much you want to put onto your image. Sharpness is a way to sharpen your ambient occlusion. Check out these leaves over here on the plant. We increase the sharpness. Now you can see the definition of the leaves. And when we take it all the way down, it just makes it blurry. So this is something to keep in mind. Again, an artistic choice, up to you how much you want to add as sharpness you want to get to the ambient occlusion. And again, it won't be very noticeable, but it definitely helps in certain areas. Next will be bias, which is basically the higher the bias, the less detail you will see on the textures. So what happens here is when you lower the bias, you start seeing ambient occlusion on your bump maps and or normal maps. So if you have a bump map or normal map, you will get a little bit of ambient occlusion where things get raised on the texture. So increasing the bias, it just takes away that detail and it just keeps where the intersections are. So that's all I'm going to talk about ambient occlusion. I just wanted for you to check it out, how easy it is to use, and then we might come back here later to tweak it up after we are done after we're done lighting the scene. So now we'll start talking about lighting a scene. So the first thing you have to know when you light a scene is what time of day is it. In this case, I decided to make it more like 1:30 to 3:30 p.m. I didn't want the sun to come straight down because otherwise this front side would be in shadow and only the top planes would be actually in light. So let me select the light source there. We're going to rotate it a little bit so I can show you what I mean. I'm going to rotate it straight down like so, and straighten it up a little bit more this way as well. So there we go. Now this would be like noon right now, and see that only the top planes here are being lit on the statue, and this is very uninteresting. So I'm gonna go ahead and undo those moves right there and bring it back the way it was. And so I want the sun to hit this side of the face of the statue, and it hit also the walkway over here, because I want it for the bounce light to hit the floor and hit those walls, so we get some nice global illumination or indirect lighting there. So the next thing that we got to figure out is what else is direct lighting, because it's very important. Without direct lighting, you cannot get good global illumination, which is indirect lighting. So first establish all the lights that actually hit the surfaces directly. So in this case would be the sun and obviously the sky, so the skylight. Now I could have used another directional light for that, but that is the problem with that is directional, and the skylight comes from everywhere, so that would not have worked. So instead, I went ahead and I used a spotlight. Now, what I did is I put it, I'm going to use the preview cam here. Here's my spotlight over there, right at the top. And this spotlight has a very wide angle. I'm going to go ahead and turn it on for you so you can see what it does. So see, it's hitting everything here because the angle is very, very wide. It's almost 180 degrees wide. It's 178. And one cool benefit of making a very wide spotlight is that it gives us very soft shadows. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the key light so you can see the effect. Now, let's select the spotlight now. And check out the shadow here, how soft it is. I'm going to go ahead and make the cone angle smaller. And now all of a sudden, look how sharp that shadow became. So right now, the slider limit is 150, but you can go ahead and type a bigger number, all the way up to 179. I'm going to go ahead and type 178 because I like that value. And another thing I notice here is that the skylight is actually not reaching all the way to the bottom of those walls, and light that's coming from this angle would. So we need to increase the intensity of that spotlight. Something like that. So that's much, much better. Now, don't go too crazy in intensity because we don't want to wash out the shadow that's being created by the sunlight. But this value seems to be okay so far. So let's leave it at that. Let's turn it off and see the effect we have when we turn GI on. So I'm going to click on this one and then on the GI preview. See, right now we have what it looks like an overcast day. So this is exactly the kind of light we're looking for from the sky. So let's turn our key light on. So now we have a nice key, which is the sun, and a nice fill, which is the sky. And the GI is on right now. And this is the effect that we get. And look at how the key light is bouncing off the floor and is actually lighting this back wall. And let's turn that off so you can see the effect. So it's not just the skylight that's reaching there now. It's also the bounce from the sun. But let's say we want to exaggerate that. So I'm going to go ahead and select the geometry over here, just the floor, and I'm going to press the B for bucket, and this will give us the eyedropper, and this will ensure that we select the proper texture for this piece of geometry. And now we're going to use one of the light enhancement tools for global illumination, which is light bounce strength. Now this will multiply the strength of when the light bounces off this surface times whatever number you put over here. So let's say we put it all the way to 2. Look what happens, or 3. Something that's more 4, which is more noticeable. Now we want a subtle effect to show that the sun is really hot. So, but we don't want to go too crazy. So I'm going to dial it down to about maybe 3 or 3 sounds good. It looks really nice. We don't want to lose this nice gradient that goes from bright to darkness into darkness here, because we want to keep the shape of the geometry. When you light, it's all about shaping things to give it more volume and make it prettier. So this looks good. We don't want to go so high on the bounce that it's going to start clipping our textures, but we want to have it so it's strong enough that it will make a difference. So this looks pretty good. So what's the next thing that we could do? Well, I noticed here that the trims here are going a little bit dark. So I could have done 2 things. I'm going to go to my global illumination parameters here, and I'm going to take down a little bit of the shadow detail. Notice what happens when I take it off. It just makes things flatter. And you definitely want to have shadow detail there, but maybe you don't want to have so much that makes things way too dark. So you can play between that. And then you can add something that will enhance the global illumination. So what I did here to bring more light under the trims here is I use a surface plane, a very simple piece of geometry here that allows me to bounce light off that surface. And all it is I created a primitive, went to here to surfaces and created a plane. So I'm going to go ahead and go to the top view so you can see what I'm talking about. And under here, trim bounds, I'm going to make it visible. And all it is that plane right there that I scaled it, and I put it in such a way that the key light would bounce off this card and it will hit under the trim. So let's see what happens from the point of view of the camera. Now I'm going to turn it on and off so you can see the difference between that. See how it gets a little brighter at the bottom? Now I could increase or decrease the surface size, or I could increase or decrease the surface bounce here, the light bounce strength. However, don't go too crazy, because then you're going to start washing out the nice little gradient that we had here on the back wall. So what I did is I just wanted just enough that it would light under that trim, but not so strong that it would actually, the lights would bounce under and hit the walls. So this looks good to me. That's pretty good. Now, this could have been another enhancement, GI enhancement tool, if we would have made this as a dummy, and then I would have put here emit GI. So it kept the properties of the GI, but it made the model invisible. So if I go to the top view now, notice the geometry is invisible, but we are still getting the effects of the global illumination because we set to emit GI. And now it's still using the bounce. Look what happens when I turn it on and off. See, it's still making a difference. It's still using the bounce from the card onto under the trim. So that is very cool tool to use as an actual bounce card. So if you need to illuminate a certain plane, for example, let's say that under the hand here was super dark and you needed an extra bounce light, you could put one of these cards so it bounces the light from the key and it would bounce right under the arm, under the hand. So this is a very, very useful tool that allows you to really fine-tune your lighting just the way you want it. So this looks good the way it is right now. So the next thing we're going to talk about here is the water. Now, they say water, what water? So yes, we have a water plane here that is covering, it's very shallow water that is covering this tile over here. However, notice that when the water is on, it makes the tile very dark. So let's talk about the water first, because it really doesn't look like water. And as you know, with a PBR system, since it doesn't reflect object to object, it uses the actual IBL as a reflection source, we need to have the IBL on. So let's go ahead and turn that on. Okay, go here to image-based lighting and activate the IBL. Notice we get a little bit of ripple information over here, which is great, but we want to have more detail. So let's crank it up a little bit more. So this starts to look more like water. It's actually reflecting more of the skylight, which is basically our IBL. But not only that, it's not just the IBL, it's the IBL with the baked geometry in it, which is, if you don't know what baked IBL is, I would definitely suggest you go into that tutorial as well. There is a standalone tutorial on IBL baking available. So, just to show you here in Photoshop, this is the original IBL that I use, and this is the IBL with the baked geometry on it. And this is what we are reflecting right now on the water. So it kind of looks like it's actually reflecting the environment for the statue and the columns here and the reflection. However, if this is not enough, you can always go into the global illumination parameters and use what is called specular bounce. I'm going to go ahead and turn that on, and so you can see the effect here. See, all of a sudden you start reflecting what it looks like geometry, but it's basically the voxels. It's reflecting the voxels that represent that geometry. And if you decrease the highlight detail here, you can increase the look of the reflection. So we want to go somewhere in between. You don't want to go too crazy where it disappears completely, but you want to go too high that it just washes out everything. So go ahead and put somewhere in the medium place. So now you can have reflections that look like they are coming from geometry, but it's really coming from voxels. So this is a very cool trick to actually have reflections on PBR shaders. However, again, don't go too crazy, because this also makes you, when you bring this into the solution, this also allows you to crank. It will crank up the reflection over here as well. So you gotta find a really happy medium to where everything gets balanced. So that's very important. So now we have some nice reflections of the water, with both in looking for the ripples and for actual what it looks like geometry. So this water looks pretty nice. However, our tile down there still looks pretty dark. And because this is so shallow, this is such shallow water, technically you should be seeing this a lot brighter, because the water is transparent, right? So to fake this out, what I did is I duplicated my water surface, and I actually made it into an emissive surface. And I put it right under the tile. And look what happens when I turn it on. It makes the tile brighter. And because it is a light emitting surface, we can increase here the glow self-illumination scale. And we can go ahead and crank that up until we're happy with a particular value. This looks about right to me. It's not so strong that it's washing out the shadows, but it's also bright enough that you could be passable for skylight over here under the shadow side. So this looks pretty good. And not only that, when you do that, also you're also lighting a little bit of the walls and the columns, so it gives you kind of like a nice caustic effect, even though you don't see the actual caustic ripples. So it's a good side effect to have. So now we have the water looking good, and this pretty much concludes the daytime lighting. So this is pretty good. And now we're going to go ahead and cover the nighttime. So to do this, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that my orientation and my image are both synced up, because we're going to play an animation here, which will transition using this new feature called Add New IBL Clip, which allows you to transition from one IBL to another IBL. So what we're going to do here is, over time, we're going to go from this daytime IBL to this nighttime IBL. These were both baked, and as you can see here, this is the original star sky, nighttime sky, and this is after it was baked and color mapped and tone mapped. So we'll transition from this to this over time. And this is using this new Add IBL, and this is very simple. I'm going to bring in the timeline here real quick. And here is our daytime IBL, and I'm going to zoom out by using the mouse wheel here. And this is our nighttime IBL. And this green area over here is the in-between or transition, how fast it's going to transition from daytime to nighttime. Now, my curve here is going from fast to slow, and I want this just the opposite. I want to go from slow transition to even faster towards the end, so we get to see a little bit more of that nighttime sky. So let me play it before I tweak the curve here. So I'm going to press F3 to remove the timeline. I'm going to go to the very beginning, and I'm going to press play. Now notice here that as it goes from daytime to nighttime, also the particles are kicking in, and particles do emit light. There is a feature where you can turn on the GI properties, and you can have the particles actually light your scene, like this torches right here. So it's a very cool effect, and you can use this for explosions, all kind of very cool tricks and special effects. So very, very neat thing to use. Now, so basically what happened here is I took the key, which is our nice strong key light here with the sunlight, that went from 1.5 with a nice warm color to the nighttime, which went to 2.25 and a bluish purplish color to simulate that moonlight. Now it's very faint in the and I didn't want the moonlight to be too strong, because I wanted the most intense part to be the torches and the floodlights. So you don't see the torches here because it needs to do a little pre-rolling here. So let me go back a little bit and play it from there. So there you go. There's the pre-roll. So you can see the nice illumination coming from those particles there. Another thing that I use over time is, you notice that during the daytime, my floodlights are turned off. So basically I animated over time my my glow intensity. So it starts off at 0 because glow allows you to create illumination when you're using GI. And then towards the end, we crank it up over here. The glow, okay, this is not kicking in. Do I have that? Okay, I must have selected one that was, it was not animated over time. There we go. So I forgot to animate that particular light. That's what happened. So we start off from 0. And then towards the end, it goes all the way up to 50. So, and the reason why I use glow instead of the self-illumination, and again, this is covered in the GI basics. Self-illumination and glow both contribute to the GI solution, is because when I use self-illumination, it was actually lighting the back of the column, and I didn't want that because a floodlight is very directional because it has a metal casing, so the lighting would be pushing forward, and that's not something that I wanted. So I turned that off, and I just put a little bit of glow because the glow intensity, no matter, even if it's cranked up, it's not as strong as self-illumination. So I wanted a little bit of that coming from the GI, but then what I did is I actually used an actual spotlight coming from the same direction as the floodlight. So if I turn that off, you can see the light contribution right there. You can see it on the front planes of this statue. So this also, I could have used what is called a shadow caster light, which only emits shadows and no light. But in this case, I actually needed the light from the spotlight, so I actually use an actual spotlight. So just so you know, if you have light emitting surfaces, you could combine it with a shadow caster light, either a directional or a spotlight, to compensate for the fact that the shadows coming from light emissive surfaces are not very accurate. So this light will allow you to give you a better accuracy on the shadows themselves. So again, this is covered on the GI basics. So if you're not familiar with that, what I'm talking about, then I would definitely suggest you watch that video. So again, let's see, what else do we have here? We have the particles that are being turned on from the beginning, actually. So you have the particles turned on, and you can see the effect of the particles all throughout the animation. But obviously during nighttime, it looks a lot better and a lot prettier, simply because it becomes a main source of illumination. Whereas doing, having a fire during the daytime, it just gets washed out by the sun, obviously, or the strong skylight. So this is pretty much it regarding the lighting themselves, both directional and global illumination. Now let me cover a little bit about the global illumination parameters here. Now, when you start as default, this the bounce strength starts with 1. Just to give you an example, this starts with 1. The shadow detail starts with 1. The bias, I think, it starts with 1 as well. This starts with 8. Voxel cone starts with 8, and this starts at 20. So you would get something similar to this when you start off with global illumination. And as far as the specular bounce, this goes to 1. This goes to 1 as well. And with shadow bias goes to 1. And there is no noise effect whatsoever there as well. So this will be your starting parameters. So I'm going to start to undo that one by one here, so that we go back to where it was. There's with all my parameters from the specular, and that's all my parameters with the diffuse bounce. Now, remember, if you increase the shadows here, the shadow detail here, you will get darker areas under the under this back wall. That is very important, and you want to have that, because otherwise your GI would just look flat, and you definitely want to have that shadow detail going on there. So that's very important to have. But again, it's an aesthetic choice, and it's up to you to balance it to get the image that you want. So now that we cover briefly the GI parameters and how we led this from daytime to nighttime, and how we transition from one IBL to the other here. One cool trick here is that you can add a curve transition here that allows you to, right now we have going to fast to slow. I wanted to go from slow to fast, so I changed the curve here. So the transition starts slow and then it ramps up quicker. So I'm going to go ahead and play that over time so you can see the effect there. Sorry, the capturing is actually making this stutter, but otherwise will be perfectly smooth. On the playback, we are getting about 27 to 30 frames per second, so that's pretty good. And so what's next now is we're going to cover a little bit about LUTs, or lookup tables. And basically all those are our filters. And here, I'm going to go ahead and turn them on. I have you can actually combine multiples. So here I have two LUTs to convey warmth, and then I have two LUTs to convey coolness for the nighttime shot. So basically what I did is animated this over time. So we have a little bit of warmth, and I believe here towards the nighttime here, it goes to 0, as you can see here, as we transition from daytime to nighttime. And then we have this desert sun. And now let me show you more how, by exaggerating the effect that we're getting by each filter. So let me increase this, see what it does. It warms things up, but I didn't want this to be like this, you know, super drenched sun warm thing, that it wasn't quite looking like noon. This is more like sunset look to it. So we didn't want that. So I just wanted to have a little bit of warmth on the scene, because if we turn it off, it was making it a little greenish. So look what happens when I turn both of these guys off. So it was a little too blue. So I wanted to make that sunlight really look like a nice warm sunny day. Same thing with the desert sun. Here is it just adding more warmth to the scene. So nothing too crazy, just a little bit of subtle effect there. Next, for the nighttime, I did the same thing. I animated this over time. So it was 0 during the daytime, and as it transitioned towards the end of the animation, which is nighttime, I increased the levels. And again, this morning effect was giving me this nice purplish blue color, so it kind of felt like nice nighttime feel to it. So I added a little bit of that, and also I added some moonlight. Moonlight again makes this look feel nice and cool, this image that is being lit by a moonlight. However, this was taking away the color from the image, so I didn't want to have too much, just enough, but just enough that was going to cool my image, because of my particles here was warming up my scene a little too much. So I wanted to exaggerate that nighttime feel. So I went ahead and cranked this up. So we have still a cool looking nighttime, but you still keep the warmth of those nice torches, right? So lookup tables, very powerful tools to modify and filter your images. I know some of you usually do this in a post production or an editor, video editor, but this could be a good way if you want to experiment before you went ahead and did your conversions inside your video editor. So or you can just render single images and just tweak them here without taking them to your editor. So these are very, very powerful tools, and professional studios such as Disney and Pixar use it all the time, lookup tables, to keep consistency from shot to shot, because what it does, it converts certain pixel colors to other pixel colors, so you can do a global tweak all throughout the movie without affecting your shots to the point that it breaks the illusion of continuity. So very, very powerful tool. So this about covers our tutorial for lighting 3D scene. And if you have any questions, we will go more in detail on individual tutorials for LUTs. Also, we'll go more in detail on how to light characters. This will be more advanced tutorials, so don't worry about that. This is all about environments, how to light an environment. And actually, one more thing I wanted to show you here is that notice the water here is kind of bland. This is because my value on my IBL is kind of low. So here over time, you can always crank this up a little bit, so you get a little bit more of that reflection on those ripples. And you can check the GI also, see if the values there are enough for you or not. So you can increase or decrease that, so you can balance that out so the water looks like water. And let's do a little pre-roll so we can see it with the torches on. So there you go, look at that, beautiful. So yeah, so we're done now. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and I'll catch you on the next one. Take care and good night.